We're going to review System Setup. Select Maintenance from the main menu and select System Setup. Our first option is the General tab. Some of these, such as selecting the Enter key, is the same as the Tab key. Your calendar date can start on Monday, and you could pick the start and end time that your operation is working. I suggest you load your printer form settings on startup so they don't have to load every time you go to print, especially with TrueType fonts. And we want to allow the retention of credit card token. Tokens are what make this software PCI compliant. We are going to track commissions, and our commissions in this case are based on the profit using the actual cost. We can also allow zero cost, and it will then use the last cost as its cost to calculate the profit. Or you can use selling price, 3% of the sell price of the items. Here are your background colors, and here's where you can set sounds up. So for example, if we have a SKU that's not found,
Houston, we have a problem.
Anything you want for your icon wave files can be put in here. Under Inventory, under our General tab, we are saying we're going to track the inventory quantities. We're going to allow sales of items before we receive them on the PO. In other words, we can sell things the system thinks we don't have. They will go negative, and then when the PO is received, it'll offset the negative with the items that were received and put it back to the proper inventory on hand. We are allowing duplicate SKUs. Now, primary SKUs can't be duplicate, but your alternate SKUs can have duplicate SKU numbers. You can use upper and lower case. You can hide the long description on the inventory form. You can allow spaces in SKUs, but it's not recommended if you're using e-commerce. If you want to contact the department list upon entry, that'll give you a listing of just the items in that department. Or prompt for stock count when you're adding items on the fly, such as a new item that you have not set up and you have Fast Add turned on, it'll ask you for a stock count. Our default lookup on our screens is the SKU, not the description. And our default price level is 2. This is what our walk-in customers would pay. Price level 2 of price level 6s. We have 6 price levels, and we're using price 2, and we'll see more of that in the inventory. Set our trade-ins to inactive. When you add a trade-in, make it inactive until we make sure the trade-in's cleaned up and ready for sale. And do you want to enable your food stamps tracking? Yes, I want to use my pictures in inventory, and this is the sizes. Under matrix items such as aprons and hats and things that just have different colors, we can set up a matrix because they all sell for the same price, but we want to keep them as separate colors or separate sizes. And this is here matrix item, the sequence. We're going by description going across, and that's how this thing is set up. A description is the column and then the row. Pricing, our default pricing is when we sell it is 2 decimal points. Our quantities are set for 0, but if you're working with some items that may want to have a quantity with 2 decimal points, that's fine. Your cost decimal places can be 4, and that's great when you're buying from overseas and they're using 4 decimal points for their cost. When we do our price markups, we're using cost as our basis. We're using, if you use current cost, if the cost is 0 when verifying. So use the current cost if the cost is 0 when you're verifying. You just check that. We can also put the price in our SKU, and that's good for packaged things like candies and other perishables. We can hide the price into the SKU setup. Our default quick sell price is price level 2, and our customer price is level 3. And see the item code disguised as an item cost in the customer item history. Here's our different 6 price groups we have. Serial numbers, we are tracking serial numbers in service for our service module. Enter serial numbers when you receive the PO. Allow duplicate serial numbers. And prompt for serial number when completing a transaction. So we prompt for a serial number when we're doing our invoice. We can also prompt for a serial number at sales orders so we could tell the warehouse which serialized item we want them to pull for that order. Trade-ins can be set up so when they trade something in, we have that as an option. When we go to sell a particular unit, it'll show us, do we have any used items, which is in our trade-ins. For invoicing, we are going to be looking under the description for searches, or you can look by SKU. We can say if the invoice prompt is negative is on, we can prompt to say it's here and go negative. Fast add, we're entering the costs when adding inventory, and we'll assign our own part numbers, not auto SKU. And the item will go into taxable until we reallocate it to a different category if we want to. Auto assign departments. Most people leave this off, and we assign our own category department. And allocation, so when you're converting a quote to an order, what we're wanting it to do is to say allocate items out of our stock or back order all the items and don't allocate anything from our stock, or hit prompt and it'll ask you what you want to do. And when creating a PO from pending, always convert all the items even if they're allocated. Under customers, our default is looking up the name. The default terms for the customers can be set for none, and then you can select which terms, net 30 or net 30 with a 2% discount. That can be done at the time that you're creating those customers. We are not going to auto-generate customer codes from the phone numbers, and our tax is based on the shipping address. If they walk in the store, they're going to pay our local tax, but if we're going to ship it to another county, another state, the sales tax will be based on that shipping address. That's called destination tax. And also use zip code lookups when entering customer information, so we can search by zip code. Skip the city-state field and go right to the zip, and then it will fill in the city-state. And we want to use zip +4. Our default address is US, Canada. For transactions, we have the assign invoice number at the end of the transaction rather than at the beginning. We can skip the prompt for PO number. This is the customer's PO number. We can require an F10 to accept when asking for quantity. I'm leaving those blank because these are typically not used. I do allow packages, allow back orders on an invoice, and before I back order, if I check this, it'll take it from a pending order that may be further out, that I can borrow it from a pending order and then the pending order will generate a requirement need in our purchase order system for that. We're asking them to pay when we invoice, not when they receive the product. So if there's a partial shipment, we get paid for the entire invoice rather than just what was shipped. Show the item picture on the screen. So when we're in sales orders or invoices or quotes, the item picture will show up right on that screen. Automatically add a decimal point when entering a quantity price. Pop up and display items price levels. If you change the price, a window will come up with all of various price levels if you turn that on. And here is our auto set for cost, how many days on a job cost is the items due. So you can just set all these due dates. Quote due dates, service due dates can be set up here. Leaving it to 0, we control what dates they're due. Here's where you start with your current invoice and your current order numbers. And at the start of a transaction, you can ask for a customer's email address, their phone number, their zip code, or ask for text numbers if you're going to utilize the SMS texting system where we text customers directly to their cell phones when product they're looking for has arrived. We can restrict the pricing and the discount percent, so people who don't have the ability to change the sell price or the discount, we can put a percentage like 5% and say they can change the price up to 5%. Anything over that, a manager's got to come and approve it. And we want to be alerted if we try to sell below cost. This slash is what's called a quantity separator. So if I put up part number T49/2, it'll automatically put 2 on my invoice, quote, or sales order. Customers, we're saying skip the prompt for an authorized buyer. I've got mine off, so I'm prompting for an authorized buyer. Alert if customer has pending transactions. So when you start an invoice, a window comes up and says, hey, we have some orders here, and this is good when the manager orders something in the morning, and then the owner comes in the afternoon, realizes he's out of stock, calls you to place an order, and this window will come up and say, hey, your manager's already placed that order. So that stops for double ordering. And we want to default to the customer side sales ID when invoicing. So if a salesman is automatically set up to handle this account, we want that sales ID to be whatever that customer's salesperson is. And when creating a new transaction, set the ship to address. We ask it either the default ship to address, store pickup, or ask. I usually select ask, and we get a selection. Then we can, at the time of making the sale or taking the phone order, we can tell it how we want it to be picked up and sale text. Here is a tax URL, and this is if you use some of the third-party sales tax programs. We use Zip2 Tax, and you'll see that on this screens. Tender, don't prompt for change when redeeming the gift certificates. Require a driver's license for checks over $25. Customer name required for returns. That's kind of a good thing to have so we know who it was that returned the item. Customer name required for tendering with a credit card. That's important. Do not prompt to use unused AR credits when tendering. By not checking that, it will pop a window and say, hey, customer's got $100 on account. Do you want to use that credit? And so we can take the credit. If you check that, it'll leave the credit untouched. Round to the nearest 5 cents. It all depends on whether your state allows you to do that kind of rounding. We're using a dollar sign for U.S. currency and some of the names that we use for the tender settings. Service orders, are we going to support the sub-owner when creating a service order? So if that's checked, then when you sell something to a main company and then they relocate that item to one of their franchisees, we want to make sure we're going to be able to support that item if it goes to one of the franchisees. Do not print service notes on invoices. I wanted to print those so people understand what we did and what the work was. Default status, when you're creating a new service order, here's a list of items that you can say when you first take it, they're checking the item in, work is in process, waiting for a customer to give approval. Default to all day when adding a new appointment. I turn that off because we do appointments, let's say 1 or 2 hours when we do our service scheduling. So we don't want to do the whole day for one customer. And when we add a new quotes, is it going to be a standard quote, a service quote, or do you want us to ask if it's standard or service? Printing is when you use those printers that can take a check, read the micro, and allow you to handle that transaction and give the customer their check back. Here is where we can, by using the customer price level, and if we sell at a lower price, we'll tell them how much money they saved by getting discounts or getting specials or quantity breaks. So that's what we're using. Prompts, these are user definable prompts. You can prompt anything in here and say it's either text, a date, or a note. And those prompts come up on the screen and you can determine where they're going to be. When I do an invoice, do I want to prompt for something? A job, an order, a service order, or a quote? And at what point do I want that prompt to come up? At transaction start or when the tender button is hidden? And if the transaction is over a specific amount, that's when I wanted to hit that prompt. This is something where you could say, like warranty. Do you wish to add on a warranty on the item that you just bought? Entry options, you can use what's called advanced search, and you can search for the vendor's part number as well as your own part number. You can search for customer codes, customer phone numbers, frequent buyer numbers if you have people with VIP cards or loyalty cards. You can scan their card and instantly brings the customer up. When the entry is not found, what should you do? In this case for inventory, we should jump right into the inventory lookup. And number pad for character limit, we set it at 9. Mapping is something coming up in the future. It's going to use the ability to do routing, and we have not activated that at this time. Shipping. Shipping is another third-party product that is currently being evaluated, and once again it has to do with shipping things with UPS World Ship or Starship, and you need an API key from let's say UPS to talk to their computers. So the shipping is working. We just need to have these keys put in. Deliveries, they're using a product called D-Track. They're waiting on a new API that will allow you to have tracking on your trucks, and when the truck makes a delivery, it has the ability to take a picture of the delivery and it sends it automatically back to that particular sales order. If there's any damage, it'll send it back to that sales order, and it'll allow the customer to sign your cell phone or pad proving and receipt of that delivery. Purchase orders. On the order list, we can use a grid for matrix items. We can activate dual tax support, and that's for our Canadian customers. Here we have autofill options. I've got mine set for the date, the PO number, and the sales ID. You could do it with sequential numbers or no autofill whatsoever. And you can then put in your own part number or your own PO number. And then here's where the prefix and the suffix goes if you're using sequential. Some people will put a prefix of the month and a suffix of the year. So that helps them narrow down POs within that period. We want to prompt immediately for serial numbers when we receive items. We want to prompt immediately to confirm the price when receiving if the cost has changed. We want to alert when back orders have arrived so our warehouse can ship the items to the customer. We want to include landed in costs when receiving. That allows us to take our freight costs and combine them with the item costs to have an actual cost, or which we call landed cost. Update costs on pending transactions when filling back orders from POs. So if you have a sales order that's pending and you fulfill it with a back order, it's going to use the cost of that new item that was received in on that purchase order back order rather than the estimated cost that was set as when we didn't have any quantity and we were going to invoice it anyhow. Default options for updating costs when you're completing the PO. You can have the vendor and item costs updated. This would be for last cost, and this is vendor cost. Vendor cost only, item cost only, or skip the update completely. Over here, we're saying we want to allocate back orders and use the due date as the date. That's how we're going to allocate items to the existing sales order back orders. And when we're using the landed cost, we want to use cost basis rather than weight or number of items. Up here, we're saying omit the vendor SKU field in the purchase order. Use a grid in purchase orders for matrix. Do not allow duplicate items on the PO. So if we are creating our purchase order and we put in the same item twice, it will then just bump the first one up quantity so we don't have two SKUs on the same PO. Print a standard style PO when we're printing the matrix and include the notes when creating items from a sales order. With the auto quotes, we bring over the spec and the auto quote line number. We want that all brought from the sales order into the purchase order. Consignments are when people give us items that they own and they would like us to sell it for them. And then when we do sell it, what percentage do we get of the sale? And then it'll create an accounts payable invoice back to the store or whoever was the seller as we did the sale for them. Accounts receivable, we set this as 0, which means the last day of the month. We are aging it by the number of days due. We want to include all transactions on the statement whenever we print it. Statement printing options, print a transaction-based statement, meaning if an item is 3 months past due, we want to show that item that's on that statement still is unpaid. Balance forward takes everything that was open from the prior month and brings it as a balance forward dollar amount and only prints the current month items. integrate invoices into the statements, what that means is the line items on each line of the statement for an invoice are displayed so the customer seeing an invoice for $1,800 can see what was purchased for that $1,800. Because we're emailing our statements, we don't have to worry about printing too much paper because the email doesn't care how big it is. Check refunds. When we give a refund to a customer, we're going to generate a check out of our own accounts payable system from this bank account. And then when taking payments and using credits, instead of auto applying it from the oldest to the newest, I want to choose what I'm going to apply the credits and the payments to. Accounts payable, in this case, I'm generating checks when I'm processing accounts payable, and I'm doing it from my Huntington checking account. Now, when we get into the types of tender management, we can then select which checking account we want to pay from. But these are just defaults that are set up. And if we're going to utilize vendor currency support, this again is for the Canadian customers. Tax options, we've got the quick sale set up for state tax. Packages are under the merchandise category, which is taxable, and no tax is non-taxable. We can base our sales tax on the total rather than on each line item if we wish. If your state allows you to do that, you just check that. Tax inclusive gives you the ability to set up specific types of taxes if they're from different states or countries. That we use value-added tax in America, but it's also used heavily in Canada. Tax Cloud is not something we're using, but you can get with your post office and get information on address verification when you're importing auto quotes or customer addresses. So you got to check with your post system, and they'll give you an ID, and you'll get a API key, and we'll be able to verify addresses are correct. Email, we could use Outlook or internal email, such as Gmail. Whenever we set up transactions, we want to attach a PDF to it or send purchase orders as an attached PDF. So those are all the options that are typically set up at the beginning when you're using the system, but you can always go in during the operation of the system and make changes, and those changes will be affected.